This will be a presentation on Proverbs 22, 1 through 9, things that are worth more than money. And I am Dr. Joe Sprinkle. The book of Proverbs is a book of Solomon's wisdom. And my message today is to pass on some of that wisdom in the Christian context of money. Money is important in life. Without money, it's difficult to obtain food, clothing, and shelter, the basics of life. But money isn't everything. And someone put it this way: money can buy you a bed, but not sleep. Money can buy you a clock, but not time. Money can buy you a book, but not knowledge. It can buy you a position, but not respect. Money can buy you medicine, but not health. Money can buy you sex, but not love. Money can buy you blood, but not life. But then as the story goes on, since money isn't everything, and it causes pain and suffering, and because I am your friend and want to take away your pain and suffering, well, just send me all your money and I will suffer for you. Yes, money isn't everything, but it is hard to live without it. And the scripture text for today is Proverbs 22, 1 through 9. And this passage gives us some wisdom about things that are worth more than money. So let's start off with verse 1. A good reputation is worth more than money. NIV puts it this way: a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Do you have a good name? I'm not sure that my name, Sprinkle, is such a good name. It certainly brought me a lot of kidding when I was young. In 8th grade, I had a buddy named Carl, and Carl would ask me whenever it rained, he would come to me and say, "Joe, are you having a family reunion?" A lot of kidding with my name. Other names could be worse. Consider these names: Anita Bath, Barbed Wire, Dandelions, Dusty Roads, Early Bird, Eileen Dover, Just in Case, Mike Raffone, Ophelia Payne, Pearlie Gates, Pete Moss, R.M. Pitt, Ricochet, Rusty Carr, Chandelier, Kelly Tires, Perry Nutt, whose name for short was Peanut. They called him Goober, actually, for short for that. Ima and You're a Hog, which was actually the daughters of a Arkansas governor. Some names are odd, and they would have given them even more kidding. But a good name, in the sense that we're referring to it, relates to good character. Unlike wealth and notoriety, a good name requires virtue. Now, do you have a good name? Do you have a good reputation? Well, why should Christians want to have a good name? Well, having a good reputation is important to our witness before the Lord. If we earn a bad reputation, that in turn is a smear on the Lord by whose name we are called. Now, this affects, for example, in a wider sphere, the religion of Islam and Muslims. One of the strongest arguments against Islam has been in recent decades, the instances of Muslim terrorists who give the whole movement of Islam a bad name. It's not just Western cartoonists depicting Muhammad that has upset many in the Arab world. It's the Muslim terrorists. They have given Allah a black eye far more than any Westerner could have done by drawing a picture of Muhammad. Similarly, if you as a Christian have earned a bad reputation, if you're dishonest, if you're a constant sourpuss, if you're rude, if you mistreat your spouse or your children, or if you are a hypocrite, you're giving Christ a bad reputation. The strongest argument in favor of Christianity should be Christians. And when I became a Christian, it was some very strong and faithful Christians who were in their own person one of the strongest arguments for considering the Christian faith. But likewise, Christians who don't live their Christianity out can be a very strong argument against it. If you're giving Christ a bad reputation, you need to amend your ways. Jamie Shell and Phil Ware wrote an article, A Reputation, a Good Name, and a Good Deal More. And they make this useful observation. As fathers, as managers, as leaders in the church, as Sunday school teachers, as husbands, as buddies, as neighbors, we know our lives are always on display. That doesn't mean that we try to play to the crowd and give a fake public life. Instead, it means that our goal is to have our Sunday words and our Monday through Saturday life match. Our reputation is more than our reputation. It's a reputation of our church and our faith. We'll have among those whom we influence. Whether we like it or not, we're all preachers. And our influence, our reputation will be more powerful to our non-believing friends than almost every sermon they will ever hear in a church building, a crusade, or on TV. Let's live today and tomorrow and always with the commitment that our reputation or our example are great tools for God to use to touch our friends with his grace. Now, sometimes reputations can be unearned, that is, unearned bad. Back in AD 200, some people had a bad idea for Christians and they would slander Christians. Here we have a graffiti that was produced around AD 200 that has in the Latin there, Alexmenos worships his God, and showing Christ in the form of a donkey, a very slanderous description of Christ. And sometimes we're going to suffer unjustly for our faith because people are already prejudiced against it. That may cause them to reject us. In that case, all we can do is consider it an honor that we are given the opportunity to suffer for Christ's sake. One of the most distasteful things about modern politics is the way that candidates of both parties tend to slander the opposition. Ray Donovan, who was President Reagan's Secretary of Labor, experienced some of that. He was accused of corruption charges and he was taken to court on those charges. The media assumed his guilt, though he was acquitted of the charges, and the evidence seems to be that he was innocent from the get-go. But because the media slandered his name, at the end of the trial, he asked the rather penetrating question, where do I go to get my reputation back? It's hard to get a good reputation back once it's been sullied, whether that's a just thing or an unjust thing. And that's why slander is such an evil thing. So that's the first point, that having a good name is worth more than money. Another thing that's worth more than money is godliness. Godliness is worth more than money, and indeed is worth money, as we'll see. And here's some verses on that. Proverbs 22, verses 2 through 4. The rich and the poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all. A prudent man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keeps going and suffers for it. Humility and the fear of the Lord bring wealth and honor and life. Now, the first thing, the rich and the poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all. Whatever our financial situation, we should recognize that all people, whether rich or poor, have a common Lord. And the Lord is sovereign of poor people as well as rich people. God created all. There's an old saying that God must really love poor people. That's why he made so many of them. And the poor and the rich alike can love at least, and serve God. And all Christians, regardless of our economic standings, should recognize that all Christians share a common Lord. And accordingly, we should not think of ourselves as superior if we happen to have economic assets. We should be reluctant to think of ourselves as better than other people if we have earn more money than they do, or suppose that they are morally inferior if they happen to earn less. We should not judge others primarily based on their economic status. As the first verse about a good name implies, it's the quality of our lives and our characters, not the amount of money that we make, that counts before our Creator. Once there was a point in my life that I was an engineer, and I gave up my career in engineering to pursue a career as a Bible college, a college Bible teacher. I made a lot more money as an engineer, but I'm not a lesser person for having followed God's calling in the ministry. I would have been a lesser person if I had not. Now, verse 3 goes on to say this: a prudent man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keeps going and suffers for it. And this translation, I'm using the NIV, doesn't bring out the economic aspect of this verse. The Hebrew translated suffered, or other translations say punished, is more literally the Hebrew word anash, which has to do with levying a fine. And so the simple keep on going and are fined for it. And so this proverb suggests that the imprudent man, the simple man, will suffer economically for not observing danger and taking precautions. And again, most modern translations don't bring out that particular economic aspect of it. The next verse, well, we should say a little bit before we go on to talk about how ungodly behavior can be costly. For example, if you speed on the highway, you could risk your life and the life of others by going down the road at 110 miles an hour. And even if you don't get killed, you could end up with a big fine for speeding. In that case, you would become a lot poorer for being foolish. Or another area you could lose money would be in with booze or the lottery. I can waste all my money on alcohol. I could waste all my money on lottery tickets and end up, in all probability, a whole lot poorer economically. Alcohol and gambling are two well-known paths to economic poverty. And of course, bad behavior brings spiritual bankruptcy as well. It can impoverish one's soul as well as one's pocketbook. Now, of course, it's not necessarily the case that a person is poor because he or she is not living right. Um, Even somebody who lives the right way could end up poor. But it does raise an economic issue. Is poverty among Blacks, which has been endemic for many decades, actually for most of the time since Blacks have been freed, is it primarily from racism or is it from bad values? And no doubt both play a role. Racism, especially early on and up until the civil rights movement, would have been the primary reason why Blacks found it difficult to get ahead. In recent decades, though, I wonder if that's still the case. Bill Cosby argued that bad values may be the primary problem. He points out that among Blacks, there was an apathy to getting an education. There was glorifying gangsters and gangster rap. There was a glamorizing the drug culture and prostitution. Out of wedlock births were self-destructive behaviors that caused poverty that was very common among Blacks. And he argued in a couple of articles that got him in some trouble with some of his fellow uh, Blacks that these things were as much, if not more, to cause for poverty among Blacks than racism. Unfortunately, Bill Cosby himself did not follow his own advice, and he was involved in some bad behavior that got him in trouble with the law, and he was convicted of that and is suffering even to this day as a consequence. Moving on to verse 4, humility and fear of the Lord bring wealth and honor and life. All kinds of virtues that the Bible seeks to inculcate into believers do bring about economic benefits. It talks about humility here. Humility is associated with piety, humility and the fear of the Lord. And this is a human quality that makes it possible to live in harmony with the world. The religious term equivalent in the New Testament to humility is the word meek. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, a verse in Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount. And so humility and fear of the Lord is a quality that's commended here. And they bring wealth and honor and life. You see, the meek or the humble, godly people tend to do quite well in the economic world. That was actually observed years ago with John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement. He preached primarily to poor people. But this Methodist observed the phenomena that sociologists sometimes called redemption and lift. The principle which states that Christianity results over time in the bettering of the poor believer's social standing. It often takes more than one generation, but those congregations which start out successfully reaching the poor ultimately become more affluent and successful individuals practicing the principles of Christian stewardship and working hard as to the Lord and not as unto men, and fidelity in relationship, and avoiding vices such as alcoholism and the like, which would give them the confidence to take economic risks, confidence that God was with them, and such people typically improve their lot in life economically as well. I might add, though, that Wesley also complained that once they did that, then they started trusting in their riches, and then they often became less godly. But godliness does have an economic benefit, because associated with godliness are the kinds of virtues uh, preached in the book of Proverbs that will allow one to do better economically in life. And then a third thing that's more valuable than money are godly children. Verse 5, in the paths of the wicked lie thorns and snares, but he who guards his soul stays away from them. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Jesus teaches us about the value of children, and that he who undermines a child's godly faith deserves to be tied with a millstone and cast into the sea. Mark chapter 9, verse 42. So here the importance of parents in keeping children from going astray is emphasized. You see, not only are a good name and godliness worth more than money, so is raising godly children. And nothing can be more devastating to a Christian parent than to have a child one has raised turn out bad. We want to reach our children to avoid the thorns and snares of life, to avoid the pitfalls and shipwrecks in life. Now, that didn't turn out so well in the case of my sister's adopted child. Although they loved him dearly and they adopted him when he was 4, they lavished upon him all kinds of attention. He didn't turn out well. And that has torn out the heart of my sister. In fact, he ended up spending most of his adult life in prison. It didn't help that neither my sister nor her husband were committed Christians. Their adopted son didn't get the kind of exposure to Christian values that might have saved his life from disaster. Now, we are to train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That word translated way is literally to initiate or consecrate a child. The Hebrew word is chanak, which has to do with initiating or dedicating a building in some cases, but here's initiate a child according to his way. Now, there's some discussion as to what according to his way should mean. According to his way could mean what his way dictates, as Watke in his commentary says, which allows for different styles of the different personalities and weaknesses of different children. Some children are too shy and must be encouraged to break out of their shells, while others are too bold and inclined to waywardness and must be hemmed in. And so we should train up a child. I think this verse probably means according to what their innate way dictates. Molding a child's character is a parent's duty. And so we shouldn't be an absentee parent. Your job is not so much to be your child's buddy, but to be your child's parent. That means saying no to some activities that are foolish or inappropriate, even if it makes your kid mad at you. Your job as a parent is to be the adult, and you're doing your child no favor if you fail to do your job. But the promise here is that if we are faithful in carrying out our obligation, then we can expect good results. If we raise a child right, we can expect him or her to turn out right. Now, of course, this is not an absolute promise. It's not the nature of the truths of Proverbs to give us absolute truths. Proverbs give us general truths, like a soft answer turns away wrath, and the hand of the diligent makes rich. Um, these are not absolute promises, but they are what tends to be the case, what is usually the case. Usually, if you give a soft answer, you can quell a hostile situation. If you work hard, you're likely to do well, but there are exceptions to those rules. And the same with this verse: raise up a child in the way, according to his way, and when he is older, he will not turn away from it. Generally, it's true. Unfortunately, it is not a truth without exception. And then I move on to the fourth point in verses 7-9. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is the servant to the lender. He who sows wickedness reaps trouble, and the rod of his fury will be destroyed. A generous man will himself be blessed, for he shares his food with the poor. Here it says that the blessing of generosity is worth more than money. You might remember how Jesus encouraged the rich young ruler to sell what he had to give to the poor. So likewise in Proverbs, Proverbs seeks to cultivate an attitude of generosity in believers. And these last verses emphasize then the need for those with material wealth to use that wealth compassionately, including for the poor. Verse 7 says that the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is the servant to the lender. Rich lenders tend to dominate the poor, and that's why it's dangerous to borrow money. It can cost you your freedom. It's not good to rack up large debts. And unfortunately, that's one of the harsh realities of life. In the Old Testament times, debtors could be reduced to literal slavery. If you couldn't pay your debts, you could be forced into servitude for a period limited to 7 years. And so, again, it was important not to rack up debts if you could avoid it. Verse 8, he who sows wickedness reaps trouble, and the rod of his fury will be destroyed. This verse warns that wickedness ultimately leads to a bad end, to trouble, to punishment. That could be from God, though not always directly. Often it's just the natural consequence of the bad behavior. And again, the context of this is that of borrowers and lenders. And so it's saying, don't oppress the poor, or it will cost you. He who sows wickedness, say oppressing the poor, will end up being destroyed, end up having trouble. Likewise, you could also put it in terms of the borrower: repay your debts, or it will cost you as well. Either way. Verse 9, a generous man will be blessed, for he shares his food with the poor. And again, this is encouraging the wealthy not to wickedly dominate or exploit or oppress the poor, but to be generous towards such people, sharing one's food with the poor. The result is that the generous person will find himself blessed, presumably blessed by God, but also no doubt blessed by other people as well. And in doing that, you will find yourself spiritually blessed as well. It'll make you feel good as you show some generosity to somebody who is in need. Or as Jesus put it, it is far more blessed to give than to receive. A quote of Jesus mentioned in Acts 20 and verse 35. Years ago, I had a daughter that contracted leukemia. She was only 4 years old at the time. And my pastor at the time was a man by the name of Claude Schmidtmeyer. And he came over to encourage us during this very difficult time in our lives. And he gave me this sage advice, which I pass on to you. He said something like, people are going to come to you and ask to help you during this time. You will probably want to say, no, we're okay, we don't need your help. But you should accept their help anyway, even if you don't think you need it, because it will make them feel better. And we took that advice. If someone said, we'd like to bring you a meal or do something else to help you, we accepted that. And it did make them feel better. In fact, it made us feel better too. It gave them an opportunity to do something kind to someone who was in need. And that was a blessing both for them and for us. By the way, the daughter survived her leukemia, and she is alive and well at the time of this recording. Well, what about then things that are worth more than money? We can summarize what we've seen in this passage in Proverbs chapter 22, 1 through 9. We see that a good reputation is worth more than money. Godliness is worth more than money. Godly children are worth more than money. The blessings that come from generosity are worth more than money. Money is important, but money isn't everything. These things are all more important than money. And so Solomon has given us wise counsel, and it's for us to live it out. We should put our relationship with God first. Our soul is worth more than money. Again, fear the Lord is mentioned in this passage, which has to do with godliness. We should work to maintain our good name and reputation and that of our Lord, and not needlessly sully the name of others. So don't slander either others or slander God by our bad behavior. We should cultivate our character, remembering that our character is more valuable to our Lord than our net worth. We should train and nurture our children, our precious children, in the admonition and teaching of our Lord. And we should bless ourselves and others by being generous. For generous people are happier than greedy and selfish people. So those are things that are worth more than money from Proverbs chapter 22, 1 through 9. And my name is Dr. Joe Sprinkle.